Howdy everybody, this is the Roaming Prepper. Today we're going to talk about why we should continue to food prep and lessons learned from the last year and a half. I'll be right back. I guess the first question should be, why do we stock our pantry? Well, it's very simple. We've seen examples of it throughout the last year and a half. Supply chains, pandemics, shutdowns, storms. Anything can happen that can affect our ability to feed the ones we love. In this particular instance, let's take a look at the Texas freeze. This was toward the tail end of the COVID pandemic to see what I saw in the stores. The quickest way to kind of learn something is to look back at what we did at the past, what we saw in the past. Now this was a video from February of 2021 when the Texas grid started having issues. Now, as you can see, this particular part of Texas did not have the grid go down. But we've seen the same thing in hurricanes, storms, the pandemic, hacks. Supplies go, and it's always the same stuff. Dairy disappeared. We also notice a lot of the cold cuts, meats, and other such things start disappearing off the shelves. Now the irony here is, unlike a pandemic which would kill people, if the grid goes down, your meats might spoil. So obviously during a freeze you could stick everything in the backyard and kind of keep it cold, but in the summer you'd probably lose all your product. People need to think more about the canned goods or dehydrated stuff. It kind of surprised me how quickly all this stuff disappeared. This Walmart was almost fully stocked just before this freeze hit. It was finally catching up. Even the frozen foods are gone. But then you'll notice in certain areas the diet food, the gluten-free stuff, all over the place. Plenty of that. So guys, if you're late to the show, ladies and gentlemen, grab whatever you can. But the gluten-free stuff will get you by, and it doesn't taste terrible, although I'd prefer some other stuff. As I continue meandering through the store, you start to notice that other things have disappeared as well. Among them paper towels, chips, a lot of the same stuff we see disappear every single time. Disappeared during the freeze, it disappeared during the pandemic, it disappears during hurricanes. So those are the things you may want to stock up on. Now remember, you saw the bread was kind of sparse there, but notice again, the gluten-free stuff, including Krusty's pancake mix, a lot of stuff you can still use. Surprisingly, there was a lot of flour in one part of this store, but the breads were gone. People go on autopilot almost every single time, so make sure you're not on autopilot. They took a bunch of instant soups and then left the canned soup for a freeze. That blew my mind. Why would they do that? But lo and behold, they did. As you notice, as I continue going through the store, there are a lot of canned goods that are there, and then some stuff got wiped out. It made absolutely no sense. People were on autopilot looking at what other people were buying. You notice on the left there's a bunch of pasta, a bunch of sauce. I would think you'd be able to cook that even if you lost power using some other means. But nope, it just made no sense at all. And remember, when there's an issue, trucks are not going to deliver on time. But you can still boil water if you have alternative cooking, which I'll cover a little bit later in this video. Don't be on autopilot. What's funny is I went through a few other aisles and look at all the fast-made foods like rice-a-roni, Knorr, stuff like that. All the toilet paper was gone from that right-handed rack, but then I turned the corner and this stuff was there. It made no sense. People just bought stuff to panic. Let's start with the fundamentals. Let's discuss food and water and how you should store it. I learned a lot of lessons living in hurricane country. Water is essential. Surprisingly, during the freeze, I found a bunch of these, but nobody was buying them to fill up with water, which easily could have gone down. I keep a personal stash plus a water dispenser that's gravity fed, just in case. If you follow my shorts or Instagram, you'll know that I put a lot of little meal deals and other cost-saving tips. We have to save money where we can, and the smart move is to try to use coupons or bulk buying to keep us stocked and maybe spread the cost out with other folks. Look for these deals. You don't have to eat it all tonight. Part of your supply chain is to diversify. I love trying new products. I haven't tried these yet, but we always eat beans with hot dogs, so it was a good pick. I'd also recommend, if you have a family, get a few of these. You can find them for as cheap as 20 bucks, and it's a good backup in case it goes sideways. If the supply chain is vulnerable, being able to grow or source your own stuff is important. Aside from finding alternative products, I also recommend using things like AeroGardens to hydroponically grow herbs, spices, any supplements. The less you have to rely on the supply chain, the better. Obviously, if you're a homesteader, you have more property. But even if you're in an apartment, you can still do something like this. Having all this food and product is great, but you need to know how to store it. You need to be smart about how you do it, and you gotta keep it organized. I've been doing a little bit of dry good canning. I still haven't gotten the handle on the pressure canning yet, but I use mason jars for a bunch of stuff, including storing coffees, pastas, spices. You can use them regardless. Also, having even simple bins to store things like taco seasoning and other products that are in pouches or little tins keeps you organized, helps you not waste your product, and helps you rotate in a timely manner. If you have accessories to your food or your storage, you can also use bins like this. Be creative. There's a lot of stuff out there you can repurpose. And of course, I like to dehydrate batches of fruit and other things so that I can store them a little more long term. Take advantage of these products if you can. Well, congratulations, you've stored food and water and you've found a way to organize it, but now you gotta eat it. Well, how do you prepare if power goes down? Aside from a propane grill and a propane-powered camping stove, I also have this nifty little butane stove that I can use. Having multiple ways to cook makes you less vulnerable to a shortage. For instance, if propane's short but I can find butane, I can still cook. During the freeze, propane disappeared, but there was some butane, which was part of what motivated me to get the butane stovetop. But even using those sternos you see in the picture, it's always a good idea to have options in case one of your primary choices is gone. Not to brag, but I make hellacious scallops on a cast iron skillet. Being able to cook your frozen or stored product in a way that's palatable is important. The scallops were cooked on an open gas stove in a skillet, and then I paired it with some pasta. All of this stuff was actually from frozen and midterm preps, some of which had been stored for 6 months or more. Being able to make good food in an emergency is much better than just eating out of a can, and it keeps spirits up, which is important. While we're talking about supply chain, there's a couple other things we have to talk about, and they're quite important. If you can fit it in your budget, make sure you're stocked up on things like ammunition, light bulbs, matches, and all those other basics. Also, make sure you have some maps. If phones or GPS go down, you might have to find your way from A to B the old way. It's pretty important to have a reasonable way to open the stuff you buy. If you get a bunch of canned foods but you only have an electric can opener, you're kind of hosed. You're going to have to get creative. This is much easier, and they're cheap. Remember folks, the supply chain could get interrupted with a hack, a storm, a hurricane, a riot. Be sure you have enough to get through. Start with 72 hours and work from there. I hope this helped you think about what you need to do for the next one. Best of luck and Godspeed.